He dumped me for a slimmer girl because I was overweight. Now I'm fit, successful, and he couldn't handle facing me. I was never the kind of girl people noticed when I walked into a room. At least, not for the reasons I wanted. I was overweight, shy, and always the friend in the background, never the one stealing the spotlight. My boyfriend Adam used to tell me I was sweet, that I had a good heart, but I always felt like those words were a consolation prize. What I really wanted was to feel chosen, admired, and loved for who I was, not for the parts of me he pitied. For 2 years, Adam and I dated. He was charming, funny, and the kind of guy who drew attention everywhere he went. He loved socializing, going out, and being surrounded by people. I tried to keep up, but I always felt like I was slowing him down. He never said it outright, but the way his eyes wandered when slimmer, more confident girls passed by told me more than his words ever could. One night, we went to a party hosted by his work friends. I spent most of the night nursing a drink in the corner, trying not to feel invisible. Adam was across the room laughing with a girl named Chloe. She was slim, gorgeous, with the kind of confidence I had only ever dreamed of having. I tried not to stare, but I noticed the way Adam leaned closer to her, the way he smiled in a way he had not smiled at me in months. When we left the party, Adam was quiet on the drive home. I asked him if something was wrong, and he finally said the words I had been dreading. He told me he thought we wanted different things. He said he cared about me, but he did not feel the same way anymore. The next morning, I found out the truth. He had already started seeing Chloe. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the stomach. I felt humiliated, discarded, like my weight had been the reason he never truly loved me. For weeks, I cried myself to sleep, replaying every moment we had together and wondering why I was never enough. Friends told me to move on, to forget him, but their words felt hollow. How could I just move on when the person I loved most had chosen someone else so easily, so quickly, as if I had never mattered at all? I avoided places I knew he might be, deleting pictures, blocking his number. But even then, I could not escape the sting of rejection. At night, I lay awake scrolling through pictures of Chloe on social media, comparing myself to her, torturing myself with every flawless image. She was everything I was not. Slim, smart, confident, radiant. I hated her. But more than that, I hated myself for not being her. But then something changed. One morning, I looked in the mirror, and I realized I had 2 choices. I could spend the rest of my life drowning in self-pity, letting Adam's betrayal define me, or I could use the pain as fuel to become someone new. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for me. That day, I made a promise to myself. I was going to take back control of my life. The first step was the hardest. I signed up for a gym membership, something I had always been too scared to do. I still remember walking into that gym the first day, feeling like every eye was on me, silently judging. My face burned with embarrassment, but I forced myself onto the treadmill. The first 10 minutes nearly broke me, but I pushed through, one step at a time. I changed my diet, cutting back on junk food and cooking healthy meals at home. At first, it felt like punishment, like I was depriving myself. But slowly it became a routine. I started to enjoy the feeling of energy coursing through my body instead of constant sluggishness. Every week, the scale moved a little, and with it, so did my confidence. Months passed, and the girl I saw in the mirror began to change. The round face that once stared back at me slimmed. My clothes began to fit differently. And for the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. But the transformation was not just physical. Every day I showed up for myself. I grew stronger mentally too. I learned that I was capable of more than I had ever believed. Friends noticed the change, but I never told them the truth. I never admitted that it was heartbreak that had lit the fire inside me. Deep down, I knew I was chasing more than fitness. I was chasing the version of me that Adam never believed in. The version of me I had never believed in either. By the time a year passed, I was nearly unrecognizable. I was no longer the quiet, overweight girl in the background. I had lost the weight, but I had gained something far more important: confidence, independence, power. And then one night, fate gave me the moment I had been unknowingly preparing for. I was out with some friends at a restaurant downtown when I heard a familiar laugh. I turned and saw Adam sitting just a few tables away. His arm was draped around Chloe, who looked as perfect as ever. For a moment, my stomach twisted, the old insecurity rushing back. But then something incredible happened. Adam looked up, his eyes met mine, and I saw it. Recognition, shock, and then something else. Regret. That was the first time I realized the power of my transformation. For the first time in my life, I did not feel small. I did not feel invisible. And I was not the one left wanting anymore. What Adam did not know then was that seeing me again was only the beginning. He thought he had left me behind for good. But the truth was, I had only just begun to write the ending of our story. And this time, it would not be the ending he expected. After that humiliating breakup with Daniel, my world seemed to collapse. I spent days locked in my room replaying every cruel word he had thrown at me. His laughter when he called me a burden echoed in my head, and his new girlfriend's smug smile haunted me. For weeks I avoided social gatherings, ignored my friends' calls, and drowned myself in comfort food. I felt invisible, worthless, and unwanted. But then something inside me snapped. One night, staring at myself in the mirror with swollen eyes and messy hair, I realized I had two choices. I could let his betrayal destroy me forever, or I could rebuild myself into the woman I always wanted to be. That night, I wiped my tears, threw away the empty pizza boxes, and promised myself that Daniel's rejection would no longer define me. The next morning, I joined a local gym. The first few weeks were brutal. My body ached. I could barely keep up with the workouts, and at times I wanted to quit. But I kept reminding myself of Daniel's words. Instead of letting them break me, I used them as fuel. Every step on the treadmill, every drop of sweat, every sore muscle was a step away from my old life. At first, no one noticed the change. But slowly, month by month, the weight began to drop. My clothes became looser, my face slimmer, and my energy returned. Also started reading more, working on my career, and learning new skills. For the first time, I felt in control of my own story. Still, deep down, there was a fire that burned brighter each day. It was not just about getting fit or building a career. It was about becoming the kind of woman Daniel never believed I could be. And I knew one day, whether by chance or fate, I would face him again. When that moment came, I would not be the broken girl he abandoned. I would be someone unrecognizable, someone he would regret losing. By the time a year had passed, I was no longer the same person. The girl Daniel abandoned was gone, replaced by a woman who carried herself with strength, elegance, and ambition. I had lost over 60 pounds, built muscle where once there was weakness, and embraced a lifestyle that made me feel alive. But my transformation was not limited to the mirror. My mind had grown sharper, my career had taken off, and opportunities that once seemed impossible were now unfolding before me. After completing my business courses, I landed an internship at a fast-growing marketing agency. What began as a small chance quickly blossomed into something bigger. I poured myself into every project, outworking and outsmarting many of my colleagues. My managers noticed, and within months, I was entrusted with campaigns that brought in major clients. The money followed. For the first time in my life, I had financial independence, not just enough to survive, but enough to thrive. I moved into a modern apartment, furnished it exactly the way I liked, and promised myself never again to depend on someone else to make me feel worthy. Despite my success, I kept my circle small. True friends celebrated my growth, but I knew others only wanted gossip about my transformation. I stayed focused, silently preparing for the inevitable moment when Daniel would reappear. It was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when. Men like him always circled back when they realized the grass was not as green as they thought. And I was right. The first time I saw him again was not planned. I was at a friend's engagement party, wearing a fitted navy dress that showed the results of my hard work. My hair was styled elegantly, my makeup subtle but flawless. I was chatting with colleagues near the bar when I felt eyes on me. Turning slightly, I caught Daniel staring from across the room. He almost didn't recognize me. He froze, glass in hand, his jaw tight. The girl he dumped for being overweight and not smart enough was standing in front of him, transformed. He tried to play it cool, but I saw the flicker of recognition and regret in his eyes. I didn't approach him. Not then. Instead, I smiled, politely, and returned to my conversation, acting as though he were just another stranger in the crowd. It was the first taste of real power I had ever felt over him, and it was intoxicating. A few days later, the messages began. Daniel reached out, starting with a casual hello, followed by attempts to reminisce about our time together. I ignored him. Silence was louder than any words I could send, but he didn't give up. Soon, his messages grew desperate. He admitted that things with the so-called smarter girl hadn't worked out. He complained about how she treated him, how she didn't support him the way I once had. He wrote, "I didn't realize what I had until I lost it." The irony made me laugh. He expected me to forget the humiliation he had put me through, the way he made me feel like I wasn't good enough. And now, because I was thriving without him, he wanted back into my life. That was the difference between us. He saw relationships as stepping stones, but I had built myself into someone who no longer needed to be stepped on. Still, part of me wanted him to see, face to face, exactly how much I had changed. Not out of love, not out of longing, but because there is a unique satisfaction in watching the person who once looked down on you now look up at you in awe. That chance came sooner than I expected. A mutual friend invited me to a small networking dinner. I almost declined, but something told me to go. When I arrived, the atmosphere was warm, filled with laughter and glasses clinking. I was introduced around the table, and when it was Daniel's turn to greet me, his expression betrayed him completely. He forced a smile, but I could see his discomfort. Throughout the evening, I spoke confidently about my work, about the campaigns I had led, and about my future plans. People listened, impressed. Daniel sat across from me, shifting in his seat, his eyes darting toward me every few minutes. I didn't acknowledge him beyond polite nods, and that seemed to break him more than anger ever could. By the end of the night, he approached me as I was leaving. "You look amazing," he said, his voice low, almost nervous. "I can't believe how much you've changed." I smiled, calm and collected. "Yes," I replied. "I worked hard for this. Change is powerful when you do it for yourself." He hesitated, clearly searching for words, before finally blurting out, "I made a mistake." For a brief moment I studied him, the man who once shattered my confidence, now standing before me like a shadow of his former self. His arrogance had vanished, replaced by insecurity, and for the first time, I felt nothing for him. No anger, no longing, no sadness, just clarity. "I know you did," I said simply, then walked past him without another word. That night, I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't about dramatic confrontations or shouting matches. It was about living so well that the person who doubted you has no choice but to choke on their regret. Daniel had wanted me to feel small forever. Instead, I had grown so large in success, health, and confidence that he could no longer reach me. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I thought the gym was just about lifting weights and running on treadmills, but it turned out to be much more than that. It was discipline, it was consistency, and it was proving to myself every single day that I was capable of change. There were mornings when I wanted to stay in bed, mornings when the soreness in my muscles made me question why I was putting myself through this, but I got up anyway. Every drop of sweat felt like a small victory against the girl who once stood in front of that mirror, crying over her reflection. 6 months passed, and the changes were undeniable. I was leaner, stronger, and for the first time in my life, I loved the way clothes fit me. Friends who had not seen me in months did double takes. People I barely spoke to before suddenly wanted to know how I did it. But the greatest change was not in my body. It was in my confidence. I walked differently, spoke differently, and carried myself with a sense of self-worth that had been missing all those years. During this time, I also excelled in my career. My boss noticed the drive I brought not only to work, but to myself. With my confidence soaring, I was no longer afraid to take up space in meetings, to share ideas, and to negotiate. Within a year, I was promoted and earning more than I had ever imagined. It was like everything I had been held back from was suddenly within reach, and I was running toward it without hesitation. Then came the day that changed everything. I was invited to a networking gala through work. It was formal, with an elegant ballroom, chandeliers hanging above, and people dressed in their finest. I walked in wearing a sleek black dress that hugged my figure perfectly, the kind of dress I used to dream about but never dared to buy. Heads turned, compliments flowed, and I felt powerful, as if the old version of me was completely gone. That is when I saw him. Daniel. The man who once told me I was not enough. The man who broke me down so badly I thought I would never recover. He stood across the room, holding a glass of champagne, his arm around the same woman he had left me for. She was beautiful, no doubt, but as I looked closer, I noticed something else. Her smile seemed forced, her eyes restless, as if being there was more about appearances than joy. Daniel spotted me before I had the chance to turn away. His eyes widened and he froze. For a moment, he did not even blink, as though he could not believe what he was seeing. I could almost hear the thoughts racing through his mind. Was that really me? Did I really transform into the woman standing before him, glowing with confidence and success? He excused himself from his partner and made his way toward me. Each step seemed hesitant, almost guilty, as though he knew he had no right to approach me after what he had done. When he finally stood in front of me, he said my name softly, almost like a question. I smiled, calm and composed, and simply said, "Hello." The conversation started awkwardly. He complimented my appearance, told me how amazing I looked, and asked what I had been up to. I listened, nodding politely, but inside I could feel the old pain bubbling up. I remembered every word he had said when he ended things, every cruel remark, every ounce of shame he had made me feel. But instead of letting those emotions control me, I stayed steady. I was no longer the broken girl he once left behind. When I told him about my career and how far I had come, his face changed. He was shocked. His words stumbled, and I could see jealousy creeping into his expression. He tried to mask it with smiles, but his eyes betrayed him. He had not expected me to thrive without him. He had not expected me to become someone who would outgrow him completely. Then came the moment that sealed it all. His partner walked over, clearly annoyed by how much attention he was giving me. She linked her arm through his, glancing me up and down with a mix of irritation and insecurity. I introduced myself with a confident smile, and I could see her discomfort grow. She knew she was standing next to a version of me Daniel never thought I could be. The irony was not lost on me. He had left me for someone he thought was smarter, prettier, and better for his image. Yet here I was, successful, radiant, and completely out of his league. And as for her, she seemed more like a prop than a partner, someone to make him look good on the outside while leaving him hollow on the inside. Daniel tried to extend the conversation, asking if we could catch up sometime, maybe over coffee. But I simply smiled and said, "I do not think that would be a good idea." Then I excused myself and walked away, my head held high. Each step I took away from him felt like a victory. Not because I had made him jealous, but because I had proven, to myself, that I had moved on. Later that evening, I stepped outside the ballroom for some air. The night was cool, the city lights glowing around me. I thought about everything that had happened, from the girl who once cried herself to sleep, to the woman who now commanded every room she walked into. Seeing Daniel had not been about revenge, it had been about closure. And in that moment, I knew I had won. The next day, a mutual friend messaged me. Apparently, Daniel had not stopped talking about me all night. He had gone home upset, questioning his choices, and his relationship with the woman he left me for was on shaky ground. I did not feel pity. Instead, I felt peace. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. The difference was, mine led me to a life I was proud of. That encounter was not just about facing my past. It was about owning my future. I no longer feared what people thought of me, no longer sought validation from those who never truly saw my worth. I was free. But deep down, I knew the story was not over. Life had a funny way of bringing things full circle, and something told me that Daniel had not seen the last of me. When I walked into the reunion, I felt every pair of eyes on me. My old classmates could not hide their shock. I was no longer the overweight girl they remembered. I carried myself with confidence, dressed in a sharp tailored outfit, and smiled, as if I owned the room. And then there he was. Daniel. The man who once made me feel worthless, who had left me for someone he thought was smarter and better. He froze when he saw me. For a moment he looked like he had seen a ghost. His smile faltered, his hand tightened around his drink, and he shifted uncomfortably. I approached him calmly. Inside, I felt a storm, but on the outside, I radiated composure. He stammered a greeting, struggling to find words. The girl he had chosen over me was nowhere in sight. Instead, he looked older, stressed, and nowhere near as polished as the man he had once been. We exchanged a few polite words, and I could see the regret in his eyes. He tried to compliment me, to casually suggest we should catch up, but I simply smiled and said, "Life has been good to me, Daniel. I wish you the same." Then I walked away before he could reply. The rest of the night, people came up to me asking about my fitness journey, my career, my travels. I had become the person I once only dreamed of being. And while Daniel watched from across the room, I knew he finally understood the truth. Revenge was not about making him suffer. Revenge was about becoming someone I was proud of, someone untouchable. He had once defined me by my weight and by his rejection, but now I was the one who defined the narrative. As I left the reunion, I felt lighter than I ever had. Not because of the weight I had lost, but because I no longer carried the burden of his betrayal. I had turned pain into strength, heartbreak into growth, and rejection into triumph. And in that moment, walking away from him for the last time, I knew that the greatest revenge was not what I had done to him. It was what I had done for myself.